Nowhere in the pages of history can one find a greater champion of justice. Return with us now to those thrilling days of yesteryear.
And I'll tell you something else, too, is I cannot stand sissies.
You're going to talk about wrestling, that's redneck talk.
And guess what, fatso? I'm the world champion.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to the 1,000 Hours podcast from whenitwascool.com. Thank you all very much for joining me. It's a beautiful summer here in North Alabama. We've had, it took summer a long time to get started. We were well below average temperatures through both May and June. Lots and lots and lots of rain. Goodness, it seemed like it endlessly rained. Then a few days ago, the rain stopped, the heat came on, it's been 100 degrees every day since, basically. So we've got kind of an abbreviated summer here. Of course, we're all watching, as I'm recording this, I usually have these 1,000-hour shows recorded up a week or so in advance, but I've got kind of caught flat-footed here, and this is being recorded the day the show's being released. Of course, we're all watching that tragedy out there in Texas with the flooding there. Very, very terrible situation, to be sure, and our thoughts and prayers definitely with the family, all those affected, and the rescuers, and everybody involved in those Texas flash floods. Hope everybody listening to this is well and good, and we're going to pick up in our 1,000-hour series, which is all about the pioneer era of pro wrestling. We're going to be picking it up in mid-1879, so we're about out of the 1870s, and the 1870s were the building block era of pro wrestling. Okay, so again, the majority of this podcast series right now, we're going through my book, Dragon King Carl's Pioneer Era Pro Wrestling Omnibus, available at Amazon, 600-page book about the pioneer era of wrestling that I did the bulk of the research for, and hopefully uncovered lots of stuff. So we know, going back now, we've already been through this part. This is a catch me back up. We know that, wrestling in some form or fashion had been around the United States as long as the United States had been around. But what it was had changed from being, backyard kid ruffians having a sport just like many kids today play football in their backyards. Many kids back then had wrestling, and it had rules to it. These had been established over in Europe, so the immigrants brought the names of these styles and the different rules about it, and brought them over. And that's the stuff that like Abraham Lincoln was doing. So we talked in detail about that moving forward. And then up through time, right before the Civil War, we started having, I'll call them stragglers from France. Okay, wrestling was already very well established, very popular in France. The French circus in particular, super important in starting pro wrestling. And so we started getting French circus refugees and people and French circuses themselves coming over here, putting on shows, and wrestling gets introduced to us just before the Civil War that way. And then it really takes off in New York. Harry Hill and his athletic establishment, Homer Lane. We had the establishment of the American Collar and Elbow Championship, Louis Ainsworth, Homer Lane, and others. And that's all the primordial soup, if you will, for entertainment-style pro wrestling in America. Well, 1870, you have the Detroit International Tournament in Detroit, Michigan, and that really sets the rules, which will be pro wrestling throughout the rest of the 1800s, with a few additions and subtractions. These are primarily collar and elbow rules. The Greco-Roman stuff would spin off from the French circus, and I got some interesting new information about that we're going to look at in just a moment. And so Colonel James H. McLaughlin wins that tournament. He soon thereafter beats Homer Lane for the American Championship, and so he's the pro wrestling champion of America for all intents and purposes. And for the last 10 years now, we've been going through how everything's evolved and changed, the rise of John McMahon, the dominance of Colonel James H. McLaughlin, the earliest rookie days of William Muldoon. We've talked about the French wrestlers, Andre Cristal, Lucien Marc, Professor Theobald Bauer, Professor William Miller, and how they have taken this this entertainment style of Greco-Roman wrestling here to the United States now. And that's one of the things I've talked a great deal about before. And that is the name Greco-Roman. I don't want you to misunderstand in any way that Greco-Roman then is what Greco-Roman is now. You know, collegiate, Olympic-style wrestling, only holds and throws above the waist and whatever. Okay, this Greco-Roman, don't confuse that with this. There were similarities, but this was a worked entertainment style of French circus wrestling. And just before I did today's show, I'm a member of a group called Wrestling Historian Salon on Facebook. And there are a lot of European researchers over there. Because, again, as I've been saying this whole time, I may have written the manual for, pioneer-era professional wrestling in America, but I didn't do much on the European stuff, which predates it. And they have great European historians over there. And this is one I want to share with you. This is from Alessio Garbini. And it says, and it's accompanied by a photo of Basilio Bartoletti. And he looks like an older fellow in this picture. He said, I would like to share with you some theories. We know that the modern way to wrestling originated with the French circus in 1820 and spread around Europe. Okay, very, very much true. The first time I found a reference in an Italian newspaper was 1868 with a troupe of French circus performers. We know how much Bartoletti, I'll get that pronunciation down here in a minute, Bartoletti was influential not only in the Italian history but also in European, creating Greco-Roman terminology, working the Hackenschmidt Jenkins Royal Albert Hall show, and so forth. He studied wrestling in France and then started working with Circo Guillaume in Genova, Milano, and Rome, starting the local wrestling scene, teaching, for example, in Rome. Said the author of this post says, I'm reading a book from an Italian theater historian, and they explain how basically the Italian attendance was the only in Europe that used to participate also with drama or comedy shows, United States vaudeville type stuff. And remember, we've been talking about that too, a lot of ours, this same formula. It's not just a wrestling show you're going to, you're buying a ticket to an entertainment event. There may be a play, there may be an orchestra, there may be circus events, maybe strongman, magic, wrestling, whatever the case may be. So that's essentially what they're talking about. Now, this post, and there's more to it, you're welcome to go on there and read it for yourself, but this sparked the curiosity of Phil Lyons, who is great. I mean, I noted him several times in the Dragon King Carl's Pioneer Era Omnibus book. He's one of the great researchers and take anything he says very, very seriously. He says he has a question. Then he says, in quotations, creating the Greco-Roman terminology. Could you please elaborate on this further? Don't think I've heard this before. And Alessio Garbini says, it is a common myth in Italy that the term Greco-Roman was invented by Bartoletti. Okay, so that's been a question I've had for quite a while. I keep trying to explain to the listeners and the reader of the book, look, hey, this Greco-Roman's different. Don't think this is, because immediately I think people think Greco-Roman wrestling, well, that's Olympic wrestling. That has nothing to do with, modern day WWE or, AEW or, the great groups of the past, NWA and so on. It has nothing to do with that. It has to do with Olympic wrestling. Therefore, they shut out all possibility of it. It's not the same thing. That terminology is, if I understand what Alessio Garbini is saying, is that terminology was created by Basilio Bartoletti, this French wrestler, which matches with everything I've read so far. I can believe this. This has the ring of credibility to it. But it says, for example, the Italian Amateur Wrestling Judo Karate Federation wrote about it on their website and put that's where that come from. Also, the prominent sports newspaper, Gazzetta, referred to it that way. So that may be the origin of the name, how this entertainment style of wrestling that we now have in the United States during this pioneer era got that name, got that very different name from what it would be in modern times. So again, please don't get confused about Greco-Roman wrestling and thinking we're talking about the origin and evolution of Olympic style wrestling. That's not what we're talking about. This, when I talk about the pioneer era, when we're talking about people like William Muldoon and Colonel McLaughlin and Theobald Bauer and Clarence Whistler and all these guys, we're talking about this led to modern entertainment wrestling. This led to Frank Gotch. This led to Strangler Ed Lewis. This led to Lou Thez. This led to Buddy Rogers. This led to Gorgeous George, to Bruno Sammartino, to, Jack Briscoe, to Harley Race, to Ric Flair, to Steve Austin, The Rock, on it goes. This stuff led directly to that. So don't let anybody tell you, hey, they were doing early UFC or they were doing, a jazzed up version of collegiate wrestling. They most certainly were not. They were doing an imitation sport for money. All right, so let's get into the book. Again, the way this show works is very simple. We have to have sponsors. The best way to do that, the one that helps us out the most, is just simply become a Patreon supporter when it was cool for a month or so. I think you'll want to stay around longer. See, we do a new show almost every single day. But I think you'll really love what we've got over there, about 3,000 podcasts on our Patreon feed, which you can. Many people say, well, look, I don't want to get into feeds and not all this stuff. I go to Apple Music and listen to mine, or I go to Amazon, and that's where I get my podcast. Yes, all this is available there. You simply they each have a little button that says Add Feed. You paste in the feeds you get from Patreon, and there you get all of our free and paid shows all in one. It's very simple to do, and it works pretty darn well for what we're doing. So to do that, become a Patreon supporter, and we'll dedicate an hour of the show to you. You can go to the 1,000 Hours page and see how far ahead we are. Or you can, if maybe you're already a Patreon or just want to make a donation, maybe you're like, hey, keep up this Pioneer Era research, you can make a direct donation by PayPal or Cash App. It's on the front page of whenitwascool.com. Just hit either one of those buttons, scan either one of those codes, and just send us a tip. Send us, however much this is worth to you, and we'll dedicate an hour of the show to you. So thank you all very much. All right, so let's get into Midway. Last thing we talked about on the last hour of 1,000 Hours, we talked about Gilmore's Garden is now being renovated by William K. Vanderbilt and renamed Madison Square Garden. It happened in May of 1879. So now, June 6th, 1879, Baltimore, Maryland, Ford Theater. A wrestling tournament takes place with assorted matches in various styles. The attendance is very light, and it didn't continue after the 6th. The American Catch-as-Catch-Can champion, John McMahon, defeated Matt Grace in a collar and elbow match. When Grace could not continue after an old wound in his side opened up and began bleeding heavily, McMahon wrestled Professor William Miller to a draw in a Greco-Roman, with each winning a fall and then deciding to end the match with a draw. June 11th, 1879, Boston, Massachusetts, Howard Athenaeum. The attendance is said to be a packed house. H.M. Duffer, and this is all in bold, H.M. Duffer wins the American Collar and Elbow Championship from James Owens. So it means we got a Dragon King Carl note coming up, but this is a big deal. Okay, James Owens, he hasn't been the best champion. Since winning the belt from Colonel McLaughlin, not only has he refused to give Colonel James H. McLaughlin a rematch, but he's been basically in cahoots with his cousins, John McMahon and his brother Peter Owens and Ed Cox, and they're tied up to some degree with Harry Hill and even at one point in time Homer Lane. But he hasn't really been a great champion at all. So H.M. Duffer is a well-respected wrestler. So he's the champion now. Let's see how this goes. Duffer won the match in 2 straight falls, though the second fall had some dispute, but the referee awarded it as a clean fall, and thus the match to H.M. Duffer. Have now my Dragon King Carl note. H.M. Duffer had been publishing challenges to James Owens in the New York Clipper newspaper, to which Owens had only been responding, "You talk big, Mr. H.M. Duffer, but I wrestle big." James Owens' reign had also had long periods of inactivity, and once he even suggested giving up the championship. Owens never agreed to face the former champion, Colonel James H. McLaughlin, despite repeated challenges in the newspaper from McLaughlin for up to $10,000. James Owens had been the American Collar and Elbow champion since December 1876 when he defeated Colonel James H. McLaughlin for the title. The 3 legitimate, quote, American champions at this point are now John McMahon, who's got a kind of, let's be honest, kind of a sketchy version of the Catch-as-Catch-Can championship. I don't know that I put too much weight on that. H.M. Duffer, he's the linear collar and elbow champion, and also William Muldoon, who's the American Greco-Roman champion. All right. So there's your big 3. And again, when you think of these styles, don't think about it as, wow, this is confusing. How did collar and elbow differ from Catch-as-Catch-Can, which differed from Greco-Roman? They were different rule sets. So this is really, don't look at it as WWE wrestling, UFC fighting, and, bare knuckle boxing or something. Don't look at it like that. Look at it instead in terms of pro wrestling, like, strong style, hardcore, lucha libre. It's different variations on the same theme. That's how I've found it to be best in just sort of understanding it. All right, June 13th, 1879, Utica, New York, at the Opera House, Professor William Miller defeated Colonel James H. McLaughlin for the, quote, combined Greco-Roman championship, including tripping with feet rules. That's literally what they called this, a variation on these rules. $1,000 also at stake, 2 out of 3 falls. Again, Miller beating McLaughlin. June 20th, 1879, Utica, New York, Colonel James H. McLaughlin then defeated Professor William Miller for $1,000 and the, quote, championship of the world in Catch-as-Catch-Can style. And here's another Dragon King Carl note. As stated earlier in this book, take these, quote, titles with a grain of salt. In this period of time, basically everybody was claiming to be a champion of some style, some way, someplace. Okay, that's just, if you had a wrestling match, it was almost a given. Somebody in that match is going to be referred to as the American champion of something. So we're primarily only considered with the linear champion, the belt. Well, there was a physical belt at some point, but the championship passing from person to person. That is the most important one. Is this linear collar and elbow championship, the American Collar and Elbow Championship, H.M. Duffer. You could make the argument for the Greco-Roman Championship of William Muldoon. It's certainly going to become very important, but we'll get through that when we get there. June 26, 1879, Omaha, Nebraska, at Turner's Hall. Clarence Whistler defeated Andre Cristal, billed in the newspapers as, in fact, the real Andre Cristal. And we've talked about this over the past few shows. Lucian Mark was impersonating, whether by agreement or not, he was impersonating Andre Cristal, going around and billing himself as that, presumably for higher pay. But the gig was up, and Lucian Mark had been outed by the newspapers, and in fact outed by the real Andre Cristal, who showed up as a, quote, unknown minor to wrestle him, and then revealed, hey, it's Andre Cristal versus Andre Cristal. What y'all going to do about it? So that's what happened there with Lucian Mark, how he gets outed, and we talked about that a couple shows ago. The match started on June 25th, and ended with one fall each, and then curfew came, and the final fall was concluded the next day. During the final fall, Andre Cristal was disqualified for grabbing Whistler below the waist, and Clarence Whistler won the match. All right, June 28th, 1879, Syracuse, New York. At the Wheating Opera House, Colonel James H. McLaughlin beat Professor William Miller in catch-as-catch-can wrestling with jackets required. So you see McLaughlin, he's touring with these Greco-Roman guys, especially William Miller right now. So whatever they're doing, they're calling these matches catch-as-catch-can, but yet they're wearing jackets, and they're doing this. Look, they're just doing entertainment wrestling. Forget the names for a while. This has little to do with skill and ability, and more to do with putting on a show, and that's what they're doing here. I made my Dragon King Carl note. Says the use of jackets or harnesses in Pioneer era wrestling was often a source of contention when people were agreeing to matches. Some people liked wearing jackets or harnesses, and some did not. While not similar in style or appearance to judo jackets, the purpose was similar, allowing for firmer grabbing points. Oftentimes, the wearing of jackets or harnesses had to be agreed to separately when drawing up the conditions of the match. Colonel James H. McLaughlin and John McMahon, they liked wearing jackets or harnesses, while William Muldoon hated them. All right, July the 1st, 1879, Belleville, Ontario, Canada. Hugh McKinnon defeated Duncan C. Ross. So Duncan C. Ross, we haven't talked much about him yet, but pay attention to that name going forward. He's going to be a big, important champion and star. Hugh McKinnon defeated Duncan C. Ross 4 out of 7 falls for the Championship of America. McKinnon was the chief of police in Belleville, Ontario. Neither of these men would have had any true claim to the American Championship despite being billed otherwise. July the 7th, 1879, Troy, New York. Charles Connors defeated Ed Cox in collar and elbow wrestling. 2 out of 3 falls. James Owens was the umpire for his cousin Ed Cox. And by the way, James Owens never regains the championship. He ends up dying young, which we'll talk about that in a minute. James Owens' career, I mean, other than a name on the list of champions following Colonel James H. McLaughlin and being part of wrestling's first big family of wrestlers, James Owens' career is rather underwhelming, quite honestly. July the 12th, 1879, Kansas City, Missouri, at the Theater Comique. Andre Cristal defeated the fake Andre Cristal, Lucian Mark, in Greco-Roman wrestling. The real Andre Cristal is billing himself as the World Greco-Roman Champion. Lucian Mark seems to be billing himself as Lucian Mark Cristal whenever he isn't wrestling the real Andre Cristal. And here's another Dragon King Carl note. The tale of Lucian Mark, a.k.a. the fake Andre Cristal, a.k.a. Lucian Mark Cristal, is one of the most interesting tales of the Pioneer era. On this date, the Kansas City Journal published the whole supposed story of the fake Lucian Mark. Lucian Mark had, months earlier, told the newspaper that he was the real Andre Cristal and only traveled under the name Lucian Mark, but took matches under the name Andre Cristal. Please try to keep up. It's going to get confusing. All right, so Lucian Mark, under the name Andre Cristal, told the newspaper that he began challenging numerous fake wrestlers using his name. One of them turned out to be really Andre Cristal. Lucian Mark then admitted, well, okay, I was the fake Andre Cristal all along, and I only used his name because I thought the real Andre Cristal was dead. Should be pointed out that the fake Andre Cristal, Lucian Mark, is easily identifiable as a bear bit off one of his fingers, which was heavily reported all over the United States in newspapers. Why it never crossed the minds of astute gamblers to count the number of fingers on the Cristal at hand is beyond me. But if you're betting on a 3-fingered Cristal, you might want to put your money back in your pocket. Of course, as only pro wrestling would have it, they started working together. The real Andre Cristal against the fake Andre Cristal, or Lucian Mark. Doesn't help matters that Lucian Mark would often wrestle as Lucian Mark Cristal and try to pass him off as a relative of Andre Cristal. Heck, he may have even been. There are conflicting reports. Nonetheless, this all may have been a work from the very start. Who knows? This is 145 years ago, but the more things change, the more they stay the same. less famous or less skilled wrestlers using the name of someone more famous or being a fake family member. That's not a modern invention. Let the Lance Von Erichs of the world rejoice. So the more things change, the more they say the same, right? Things are happening in 1986 that very much can reflect back to the 1870s. So this is, in fact, real pro wrestling we're talking about here. July 15th, 1879, Troy, New York, Ed Cox beat Charles Connor in collar and elbow wrestling. July 17th, 1879, Bradford, Pennsylvania, Wagner's Opera House, Colonel James H. McLaughlin beat William Miller, so they're still touring together. July 18th, 1879, Topeka, Kansas, Andre Cristal defeated Lucian Mark in Greco-Roman. All right, and so that brings us to August of 1879, so that's a good place for us to pause for a mid-show break. When we come back, the New York Sun newspaper is going to weigh in who they think the real champion in wrestling is, and we'll talk about that right after this. Hey everybody, this is Carl Stern from WhenItWasCool.com. I'm here to tell you about my new book, now available, Dragon King Carl's Pioneer Era Pro Wrestling Omnibus, the Bible of the Pioneer Era of professional wrestling. Pro wrestling didn't start with Frank Gotch. He didn't just appear out of the void to bring us entertainment-style professional wrestling. No, it was built on a legacy some 70 to 80 years old. That's what I'm going to talk to you about, an era of wrestling in America seldom ever discussed, never before in this detail. I have put 700 pages of information about the pioneers of professional wrestling, like William Muldoon, Colonel James H. McLaughlin, Professor Theobald Bauer, Clarence Whistler, William Miller, and so many more. Maybe some names you've never heard of before, maybe some you've only heard in passing. I will tell you the origins and evolution. Now available, Amazon.com, WhenItWasCool.com. All right. Thank you for joining us again. I'm Carl Stern from WhenItWasCool.com. Also host a classic wrestling show at WrestlingObserver.com and Figure4Online.com. Hope you'll check out all of those. Very important, you check out our Patreon. That's what keeps our shows going, funds our website, and we really need you to check it out over there and consider being a sponsor. Hey, not only will we sponsor an hour of 1,000 Hours in Your Name, but many shows, including this one, have a Patreon extended edition. Yes, when all of you listening at Observer, Figure 4, or on our free feed through Amazon or Apple or Spotify or wherever you listen to podcasts, when that episode ends for our Patreons, you're going to get another 10 or 15 minutes of the show where we're going to talk about some interesting pro wrestling tidbits. So that'll be coming up for Patreons only at the end of this show. Sign up at WhenItWasCool.com. So August of 1879, August 2nd, 1879, the New York Sun weighs in on the dispute over who the American collar and elbow heavyweight champion in wrestling is, stating that many people, including John McMahon, Colonel James H. McLaughlin, Duncan Ross, James Owens, H.M. Duffer, William Miller, and others are claiming it. John McMahon is now billing himself as, quote, acknowledged champion of America for his upcoming match against James Owens. Historically, linearly speaking, H.M. Duffer should still be considered the American collar and elbow champion at this point. All right, August 6th, 1879, New York City, New York, St. James Opera House, attendance 450 people. American collar and elbow champion, collar and elbow match. The American collar and elbow title is on the line, even though neither one of these people are the official champion. John McMahon beat James Owen. And despite the fact that H.M. Duffer is the actual linear American heavyweight champion, this match was billed in all the newspapers as for the American collar and elbow championship. McMahon won 2 out of 3 falls. So either way, it looked like James Owens' reign was coming to an end right here in 1879. Now it's just an argument over who you think the real champion is. August 9th, 1879, Kansas City, Missouri, at the Board of Trade, the American heavyweight champion of Greco-Roman, Professor Theobald Bauer, wrestled Andre Cristal to a draw after the match went to midnight on Saturday and sports were prohibited on Sunday in Kansas City. During the match, Lucian Mark, who was one of the umpires, was kicked out of the arena for talking too much and causing a disturbance. It was said that the final fall, one man each taken to fall on Saturday, would resume on Monday. All right, Lucian Mark, man, he's even showing out at ringside. August the 12th, 1879, Kansas City, Missouri, Board of Trade. What was to be the final fall of the match between Professor Theobald Bauer and Andre Cristal was to take place, but a doctor refused to allow Cristal to wrestle due to illness. Theobald Bauer was announced as the winner. In a mixed styles match, Clarence Whistler, who is said to be a pupil of Andre Cristal, defeated Charles Murphy. So this is the beginning of the rise of Clarence Whistler, who's going to be a major, major name. And maybe he's not a name you're all that familiar with, or you're only familiar with him up to the point where, oh yeah, he was William Muldoon's chief rival. He was. He was also William Muldoon's chief business partner. He was also sometimes really fighting William Muldoon, and sometimes they're working together on this, worked pro wrestling. He also is going to die very young in a weird kind of way. And at the time he died, many newspapers felt like he was the true world heavyweight champion of everybody. No matter what American you put in front of your championship's name, Clarence Whistler was still your superior. So pay attention to Clarence Whistler going forward. He's a much bigger name than he's ever been given credit for. Anytime the Pioneer Era is mentioned, he should be up there mentioned with the likes of William Muldoon and Theobald Bauer and William Miller and all these. Clarence Whistler should very much be in there. August the 18th, 1879, Detroit, Michigan. The Coliseum. Andre Cristal defeated Professor Theobald Bauer in Greco-Roman wrestling, 2 out of 3 falls. Also on August 18th, 1879, Colonel James H. McLaughlin answers questions from the Detroit Free Press newspaper, saying that he is considering taking another break from wrestling. He says that despite being challenged by Andre Cristal, that Greco-Roman wrestling was never his real game, and he isn't sure if this Andre Cristal is even the real one or not. Remember, McLaughlin broke the collarbone, supposedly Andre Cristal, who started this whole mess. Turns out Lucian Mark, and turns out he may or may not have got his collarbone broken as he kind of replayed that same gimmick going across the country. So interesting tales here being wove in the Pioneer Era of wrestling. August the 19th, 1879, Detroit, Michigan, the Coliseum. The second night of wrestling takes place with Andre Cristal defeating Thomas Murphy in Greco-Roman. After the match, he was challenged by Robert Wright, but the challenge was refused. Cristal said he only wanted to wrestle Colonel James H. McLaughlin and was dismayed to learn that McLaughlin was claiming to retire again or only be interested in collar and elbow wrestling. Okay. Now, August 21st, 1879, it is reported that Professor William Miller has inherited $15,000 from his uncle passing away in London, England. The newspapers report that Miller now makes Baltimore, Maryland his home and has married a lady there. So, if you kind of notice, just to backtrack a little bit, William Muldoon's rise to success and power became through William Miller. Okay, William Miller is the first person, and depending on whose story you believe, we've seen both tell a version of the story. Both of them are like, yeah, this is true, except William Miller says, yeah, William Muldoon, I let him beat me, and it went to his head. William Muldoon is like, when I found out they were all fake, I started beating them all up for real, and that's why I'm the champion. Then Muldoon started calling Miller's wife ugly and terrible names about her, saying she was a loose woman, and literally suckered William Muldoon into an ambush with another police officer who beat him severely with a billy club. This really actually happened in the streets of New York. We've talked about it. It's in detail in the book if you want to read about it. Dragon King Carl's Pioneer Era Pro Wrestling Omnibus, available from Amazon. So then Muldoon goes on to beat Professor Theobald Bauer. So what happened to Miller? Why is Miller, stopped being so regularly seen in New York? Well, this is why. He moves to Baltimore, but he's going to end up moving back to Australia pretty soon. He wasn't actually even from London. He's going back to Australia. So And that's going to have very, very significant consequences for pro wrestling in America. Is William Miller, seemingly, a second-tier name in the Pioneer era, he's actually wields tons of influence when you think about Muldoon essentially getting his start in a lot of publicity because of his blow-up with William Miller, the fact that William Miller and Professor Theobald Bauer have toured this fake Greco-Roman all around the country and made out like bandits doing so, and now Miller's going to go start pro wrestling in Australia as well, with some major consequences to the United States. So William Miller's another guy whose name and profile really needs to be raised through this research. August 23rd, 1879, Boston, Massachusetts. Mullis Gardens. John McMahon wrestled Matt Grace to a draw in collar and elbow wrestling, splitting one fall each. They did not compete the third fall due to complaints that there were stones protruding under the wrestling surface, and they feared injury. So this is the day before the rings that were lifted up off the floor. Oftentimes they had just sawdust down with a tarp spread over a canvas spread over the sawdust, or many times they were just on the flat floor of whatever stage or arena they were at. Although, it is James Owens and John McMahon who are credited for being the first to use mats. They were stuffing comforters with sawdust or something like that and using those as mats. And eventually they're going to have, roped off stages and stuff, although it takes a while for that to manifest. August the 27th, 1879, Detroit, Michigan, at the Opera House. Attendance 1,500 people. Colonel James H. McLaughlin defeated Andre Cristal, the real one, presumably, in a mixed styles match. McLaughlin won collar and elbow and catch as catch can, and Cristal won the Greco-Roman round. Imagine that. They each won in their preferred style. The newspaper called it a complete hippodrome and said, quote, it was all cut and dried, and quote, there was nothing square about it, and, quote, it was a put-up job. And we've discussed these terms before. This is early speak for a work. The term put-up job ultimately becomes, we'll hear Clarence Whistler use this term eventually, put-up job ultimately starts to refer to the person losing the match as a jobber. And that's where that terminology comes from. September the 2nd, 1879, Detroit, Michigan, Whitney's Opera House. Andre Cristal wrestled Robert Wright to a draw. During one of the breaks between falls, Colonel James H. McLaughlin got into a fight with Professor Theobald Bauer in the dressing room. Andre Cristal also got involved, and McLaughlin punched him in the face, and it caused his eye to be cut. The match was mixed styles, with each gaining 2 falls, and the final fall was supposed to be catch as catch can, but was called off due to the fight in the dressing room. But somehow they managed to work things out and do business together, because on September 13th, 1879, Detroit, Michigan, Whitney's Opera House, Colonel James H. McLaughlin defeated Professor Theobald Bauer in a mixed styles match. McLaughlin won 2 falls, but lost to Bauer in Greco-Roman. So here I have a Dragon King Carl note. Whatever the dust-up was between Colonel James H. McLaughlin and Professor Theobald Bauer, 10 days later seems to have been cleared up, as now they work together on this show and split falls. Following the street fight with William Muldoon, Professor William Miller has moved to Baltimore and seems to be distancing himself from Bauer for the moment. Just like in the case of Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels over 100 years later, sometimes things get real, even in the prearranged world of pro wrestling. More things change, more they stay the same. All right, September 24th, 1879, Boston, Massachusetts, Music Hall. Attendance 700 people. American collar and elbow champion H.M. Duffer defeated E.R. Holcomb, and Nat Hutchins battled someone named Lovejoy to a draw in collar and elbow. Also, Detroit, Michigan, Whitney's Opera House, Robert Wright defeated Andre Cristal in a mixed styles match. That brings us now to October of 1879, October 4th, 1879, New York City, New York, Madison Square Garden, formerly Gilmore's Garden. So this is the first show at the officially named Madison Square Garden. Now, they've had shows at Gilmore's Garden prior to this, and prior to that, even at P.T. Barnum's Geological Hippodrome, which was the same thing that ultimately became Madison Square Garden. But here at the formally named Madison Square Garden, attendance 1,500. John McMahon. How weird that the first match in a Madison Square Garden under that name was with a McMahon. Now, he's no relation to Vince McMahon Sr. or even Jess McMahon. Jess McMahon, Vince McMahon Sr., Vincent Jr., all that. He's no relation. But, wow, the McMahon name is just intertwined in so many different ways with Madison Square Garden. John McMahon battled Professor William Miller to a draw in a mixed-style match. Each man had one fall when the midnight curfew arrived. All right, October the 18th, 1879, Baltimore, Maryland. Started to put Baltimore, Massachusetts. Sorry about that. Baltimore, Maryland. Front Street Theater. Professor William Miller defeated Professor Alessandro, who is Richard A. Pennell, R.A. Pennell, well-known wrestler. He was billing himself as the champion of England and Europe and the strongest man alive. In Greco-Roman wrestling, matches lasted 2 hours, best 3 of 5 falls. So this was, of course, a huge work. R.A. Pennell was a touring wrestler here in the United States, but they're going to put a new gimmick on him. He's going to be Professor Alessandro, and he is the champion of England, Europe, and the strongest man alive. They're putting new gimmicks on established wrestlers in 1879. So for all of you who were dumbstruck when Robert Fuller showed up as Colonel Rob Parker, or Jimmy Golden showed up as Bunkhouse Buck, or Crusher Khrushchev showed up as Demolition Smash, this stuff was going on over 100 years before. October the 19th, 1879, Toronto, Canada. Adelaide Skating Rink, attendance 3,000 people. Big attendance for this day. Duncan C. Ross defeated Captain J.C. Daly, the Irish champion in mixed styles, 3 out of 5 falls. Look, Duncan C. Ross and Captain J.C. Daly are going to be like Miller and Bauer. They're going to wrestle each other dozens of times all over the place. So we're about to enter their era. Duncan C. Ross is going to be a major name. All right. October 22nd, 1879, back to Madison Square Garden in New York City. Attendance 1,500 people, same as the last time. Edwin Bibby defeated Andre Cristal in Greco-Roman wrestling. The referee was William Muldoon. Andre Cristal's umpire for the match was Professor Theobald Bauer, who protested one of the falls. I have here a Dragon King Carl note. Professor Theobald Bauer told the New York Daily Herald that William Muldoon was biased against him since he had previously wrestled Muldoon and was forced, his words, to sign papers agreeing to let Muldoon win. So, Theobald Bauer, what a con man. What an absolute carny back in the day. So he's been caught numerous times working matches. And here he says, yeah, I wanted to beat this Muldoon fair and square, but the police department, all them, they made me sign a paper saying that, I'd let him win. Such as the breaks in life, I suppose. Yeah. Bauer. Wow. All right, anyway, so Muldoon disagreed and stated that there were only papers Bauer had to sign guaranteeing his appearance, since he had previously failed to appear for his matches. This was Englishman Edwin Bibby's first match in the United States. The newspaper called the match, quote, long and grueling, and Cristal was unable to continue. The Brooklyn Daily Eagle newspaper writes the following, quote, in the past 2 or 3 years, there has been hardly an honest wrestling match. Cricket is the only honest professional sport. I bet there's a bunch of cricket players back in 1879 going, whew, man, they didn't find us out. Anyway, the chasm between the old Greco-Roman wrestlers like Professor Bauer and Professor Miller and the new Greco-Roman star William Muldoon continues. It is clear some hard feelings inside the Greco-Roman camp still exist. October 23rd, 1879, the New York Daily Herald runs an investigative piece into the New York police involvement in fixed wrestling matches. Now, they've been caught here. All this is finally spun up enough controversy. There has to be an investigation. Are police officers faking wrestling matches and getting paid for it? Essentially fraud. So what'd they do? Professor Theobald Bauer had alleged that he had signed an agreement to let Muldoon win their match. Muldoon emphatically denied this to the newspaper. Muldoon said that fellow officer Detective Tommy Adams planned the whole thing out in an effort to discredit William Muldoon. He said that Detective Adams had been part of a troupe with Andre Cristal and Professor Theobald Bauer out west giving fraudulent wrestling shows under the name of Thomas Murphy. Muldoon said he and Detective Adams had been at odds since the Police Athletic Association was formed, and ultimately it was over money. Imagine that. Everything I've learned about William Muldoon paints him as a headstrong individual who is going to do things his way. Obviously, it worked out for him, but Muldoon is at some point at odds with almost everyone he ever worked with. So pay attention going forward. Everybody Muldoon works with, how does their relation end up? Starts off working with William Miller. Well, they're completely at odds. He starts off working with Professor Theobald Bauer. Now they're having police investigations over their involvement with one another. So watch who's Muldoon become involved with next and what ends up being the course of their relationship. Muldoon has terrible problems getting along with anybody. He just does. November 8th, 1879, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, 5th Street Market House. Lucien Mark defeated Monsieur Joseph in Greco-Roman wrestling. All right, November 16th, 1879, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, at the skating rink. Otto Wagner defeated Lucien Mark in Greco-Roman wrestling. So here's Lucien Mark. He's traveled back around the Great Lakes now, so he's gotten himself. And look, these wrestlers are going to be, it's amazing to me when back here you didn't have airplanes. The only way you got across the country was by train usually to go cross country. Just how broad these wrestlers worked. I mean, they're all over the place. Muldoon's going to end up wrestling everywhere from not only New York, but New Orleans and San Francisco and even Portland, Oregon. He's going to be all over. All these guys are everywhere. So very, very interesting. November the 16th, 1879, November 17th, 1879, Albany, New York. Duncan C. Ross wrestled Captain J.C. Daly to a draw at 1 fall each in mixed styles. The match was continued the next day, and J.C. Daly was awarded the win after Ross suffered an arm injury, could not continue. December 4th, 1879, Madison Square Garden, New York City, New York. Edwin Bibby defeated Andre Cristal 2 falls. December 9th, 1879, Baltimore, Maryland. Professor William Miller defeated Professor Theobald Bauer, Greco-Roman wrestling, for the World Greco-Roman Championship. December 13th, 1879, there is an article in a future newspaper about the American Heavyweight Championship belt held by H.M. Duffer. So what this is I found a newspaper many years after 1879 that brings this up, and so I've retroactively put this in there. Okay, H.M. Duffer, at the time the article was published, states that the belt has this date inscribed on it, December 13, 1879, as Duncan C. Ross winning it in Belleville, Canada. There seems to be no record of this match in any of the newspapers in the area. 2 days later, however, Duncan C. Ross wrestled J.C. Daly in Belleville, but the newspapers did not attach any sort of championship implications to it. So what happens is, years down the road, there is a championship belt that has been passed down, and it's got inscriptions on it of when this belt was won and lost, and one of the inscriptions was December 13th, 1879, recording Duncan C. Ross winning it in Belleville, Canada. But there seems to be no evidence that ever happened, so I'm not really sure what happened there. Probably was this match, December 15th, 1879, Belleville, Canada. Duncan C. Ross wrestled Captain J.C. Daly to a draw in a mixed-style match. They wrestled up to midnight when the match had to be called off. And what probably happened, unreported in the papers, is the next day, Ross probably won that final fall and probably got this championship belt for it, which has this date inscribed on it. All right, let's see if we can get on through December here and conclude 1879. December 16th, 1879, Cincinnati, Ohio, Robinson's Opera House. Professor William Miller defeated John McMahon in a mixed styles match, 2 out of 3 falls. December 20th, 1879, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Opera House. Attendance was said to be small. Lucian Mark defeated Levy M. Martin in Greco-Roman Wrestling, 3 out of 5 falls. Also on that same date, Montreal, Canada, at the Theatre Royal. Attendance was a large crowd. Duncan C. Ross defeated Captain J.C. Dally in a mixed-style match for a medal valued at $1,000. And finally, our last note for 1879, December 23rd, 1879, Cincinnati, Ohio, Robinson's Opera House, John McMahon defeated W.L. Kennedy in a collar and elbow style match. All right, so on our next show in 2 weeks, 1,000 Hours show in 2 weeks, we'll pick up in 1880. And boy, we're really getting into the era here of William Muldoon, H.M. Duffer, G.W. Flagg. There's a real explosion of wrestling going to take place in the 1880s, and so I hope you'll stick around and enjoy us for that. Hope you'll pick up a copy of the book if you don't have the book yet. It is called Dragon King Carl's Pioneer Era Pro Wrestling Omnibus, the Bible of the Pioneer Era Pro Wrestling. It's available on Amazon. If you want a quick, easy way to get to the book, go to whenitwascool.com. On the front page, you can just click the link there. Also, if you want to support an edition of 1,000 Hours podcast, the PayPal, Cash App links are right on the front page, plus multiple Patreon buttons. We prefer you do that. That is really what helps us most and helps us best, our new Patreon supporters. And so anybody that signs up at the $5 or more level, I'm going to dedicate an hour of 1,000 Hours to you. And you can even choose the topic if you so desire. Just put that in your notes, and I will try to do some research or discuss whatever your person or personality or championship or whatever you want to know about the Pioneer Era of Wrestling. Put that in your comments or info box when you make that donation, and we'll certainly do that up for you to keep this show going. I really enjoy 1,000 Hours. This was the brainchild of the great No Friender, and it's been a very, very successful thing for us here at When It Was Cool. I think it's driven many new people to get the Pioneer Era book that previously may not have gotten it. So thank you to anyone who supported us that way. We really and truly need your support on our Patreon this summer. So please, if you choose to do anything, I hope you'll consider doing that. For our Patreon supporters, stick around. We're going to go a few more moments after the show, although we're not going any further in the timeline. We're just going to discuss some general notes. And that'll be right after this. For everybody else, thank you all for listening, and I'll see you here soon at whenitwascool.com.
We depend on Patreon support for our website and podcast network. In order to continue these podcasts you enjoy, we need you to visit whenitwascool.com and pledge at least $1. You'll gain access to lots of exclusive podcasts, newsletters, and more. Sign up is quick, simple, and can be canceled at any time. whenitwascool.com and click any Patreon link. Thank you.